Welcome to this session titled The 7 Hebrew Words of Praise. Have you ever had a moment where you were listening to a pastor or a Bible teacher, or you were doing your own study involving the original Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek, and you gained a whole new insight or revelation that wasn't there in the English translation? Can you relate to that? This has happened to me many times, and it continues to happen. I'm going to give you three they're not really make it or break it examples, but they might mess with your head a little bit. We'll see here. The first one is in regards to the story of Mary and Joseph, and then also the story of the Good Samaritan. And I'm talking about the word inn, I-N-N, inn, the inn, okay? So when you look at the Greek word in the story of the Good Samaritan, that word for inn literally means like a public lodging, like we would think of as an inn, okay? Well, we see that word inn, and most of us, if not all of us, have grown up with there was no room in the inn. There was no room in the public. There was no hotels available. There was no B&Bs available. There was no room in the inn. Well, that Greek word, the literal translation is guest room or guest chamber. And some of our English Bible translations have literally changed. They no longer put the word inn, they put the word guest room in there. So if we were to think about that a little bit and start to maybe look into the culture a little bit instead of our tradition, it's like, okay, so Joseph is going back to his hometown. So it'd be quite easy to assume that he had family there. And in that culture, you would think he is going to be staying with family. So it would not be hard to imagine that when it says no room in the guest room, that Jesus was laid in a manger. So family didn't have any guest rooms available. Okay, so if there's no room in the guest room, then what does that mean that he was laid in a manger? Well, it's very common for homes to have a side room built onto them where they would bring the animals in at night, and you can look it up yourself, you can Google it how you want, and you will find pictures of stone mangers built into the side rooms of homes, and that was their room where they would bring the animals in. And so, who knows, maybe Jesus and Mary and Joseph were crammed into this extra little side room because there was no room in the guest room, and he was laid in this stone manger. So that might mess with your head a little bit, but there's an example when you look at the original word. Here's another example that really messed with my head, not in a significant life-altering way, but very interesting, and that is when Peter denied Christ and the rooster crowed, right? So when you look at the original word, the definition is cock, yes, but when you look at Hebrew and Aramaic words, that also has that definition, but the word is gaver, okay? Gaver. And the person who would be called the temple crier, the one who early in the morning was calling the people to early prayer, he was called the gaver. He was the gaver. So it is quite possible, and in my mind makes a lot more sense, that the cock crowing was not God making a rooster crow right when Peter denied him, but it makes sense that all this unfolding in this short amount of time that was happening in the temple, it was the temple crier calling people for early prayer. The cock crowed, the cock shouted out. So very interesting possibility there. Another little interesting one, not life-changing, but just interesting, when Jesus is saying it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. There's been lots of conjecture as to how that could make sense and lots of reasons given why. But when you look in the Hebrew and the Aramaic, that word also means, the original word actually literally means rope. A rope, not a camel, a rope. It is easier for a rope to go through the eye of a needle. And when you think about threading a needle, and then you think about trying to thread a needle with a rope, it could make a lot more sense that that was the analogy that Jesus was trying to give. So just interesting stuff that happens when we start digging into original language, and that's what we're going to experience in this lesson on the 7 Hebrew words of praise. Various forms of our English word praise are found hundreds of times in the Scriptures. But many times, our word for praise is replacing the original word that has a very distinct meaning. While there are many of these words, we're just going to look at these 7 primary ones. With each word, we're going to look at the original meaning, an example in Scripture, and look for the point of revelation about God. As we look at these expressions of praise, we will continue to look through the lens of relationship. Doing flows out of being. So these expressions of praise are a significant part of our doing when they flow out of being, when they're connected to relationship, which is the pattern of revelation and response. So Jesus here is quoting Deuteronomy again, one of his favorite chapters, when he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." In some translations, all your mind. So he's not saying there's all these different parts of you and get them all engaged. He's saying with your whole being. With your whole being. And your strength, yes, includes not just thoughts and emotions, but body. So it's our whole being. We are one. And James puts it into his own words by saying, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. So doing any expression of praise is an act of surrender. It's an act of obedience, which is connected to relationship. And this is worship. So as we look at these expressions of praise, we will also continue to look through the lens of God's pattern for relationship, which is revelation and response. And we find a powerful story and a powerful example in the life of King David that shows us what happens if we lead out of response-focused worship instead of revelation-focused worship. So this is our illustration of King David. We're going to be looking at 2 Samuel 6 and 1 Chronicles 13 to 15. And we're talking about the 2 times that David brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. So we talked about the Ark representing the presence of God, being the most precious of the tabernacle, the furnishings. The Ark traveled with the Israelites all through the 40 years in the wilderness. God said to Moses, "This is where I will give you all my commands for my people." When they traveled, it was carried by the priests, and it was covered with a veil of skins and purple cloth. During all their battles, they were led out by the Ark. Once they settled in the Promised Land, it was first kept at Bethel, which means house of God. And next we read that it was kept at Shiloh during the time of Samuel's apprenticeship and was being cared for by the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, who were very evil priests. And during this time, the Israelites went out to battle against the Philistines. After losing the first battle, they took the Ark out with them in the next battle, and they were badly defeated. Hophni and Phinehas were killed, which God said was going to happen. The Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines, and when Eli heard the news, he fell over off his chair, broke his neck, and died. So the Philistines took the Ark to several different places of towns of theirs, and each time disaster struck. The first time they set it up in their temple to Dagon, and the next day Dagon was toppled over, okay? And then there was this breakout of tumors and rats. So they sent it to another town. Same thing, tumors and rats. Send it to another town. Same thing, tumors and rats. And so they're like consulting their priest, like, what do we do? So here's the idea. To prove that this is really from God and not circumstance, let's put it on a cart. Let's get 2 cows who just recently had calves, who have never been yoked at all, and yoke them up to this cart, put the ark in there, and just send it out. And if it goes back to the land of Israel, then we know this is from God. And sure enough, the cattle went, 2 cows went, lowing all the way, it said. So it was sent back to Israel. It was sent to Kiriath Jearim, to the house of Abinadab, whose son Eleazar was sanctified to keep it, and there it stayed for 20 years. During this last 20 years was the season of David rising up, okay? Being forgotten about by his own father as Eli came looking to anoint, went to the house that he was supposed to anoint the son. David comes out finally. Oh, yeah, this is the one. Then all the things happening with the battle of Philistines and him slaying Goliath, and then him getting in the favor of Saul, but then David being successful in battles, and then Saul hating him. So that whole thing, and then finally Saul being killed, David rising to the kingship, but the nation is divided. So David is battling, fighting battles, working with leaders, bringing the kingdom together. He finally captures Jerusalem, and so Jerusalem is now going to be the center of the new united kingdom. And so now David says, now is the time to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. So in 2 Samuel 6, we see the first account of David bringing the ark. So they put the ark on a new cart, being pulled by oxen. David led the whole house of Israel with a response of celebrating with all their might. Here's what the response looked like. Celebrating with all their might. Instruments, singing, shouting, and dancing, being led by David with his own exuberant response. Then the oxen stumbled. Uzzah reaches out, takes hold of the ark, and the Lord strikes him dead because of his irreverent act. David became angry with God, and then he became afraid of God. So he took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months, who was blessed, and David, recognizing that, attempted to bring the ark to Jerusalem. We're still in 2 Samuel 6, so this is the second account of bringing the ark in Jerusalem, and he brought the same exuberant response. Instruments, singing, shouting, dancing, but this time there was joy, there was blessing, and there was generosity as every person got food and was celebrating. So the first time, the response brought anger, fear, and death. The second time, the same response brought joy, blessing, and generosity. Why? To get the insights into that, we got to go to 1 Chronicles 13 to 15. In chapter 13, we see the first account of bringing in the ark, same thing as the first part of 2 Samuel 6. And then we have chapter 14, and we gain our first insight. In chapter 14, David goes to battle with the Philistines on 2 different occasions. On each occasion, it says, David inquired of the Lord if he should attack. Each time, David responded with obedience and great victory. The second time, the Lord actually gave different instructions for the attack than the first time. Each time, David inquired of the Lord. Each time he got the instructions, got the revelation. Each time he obeyed. Each time there was great victory. Little light bulb goes on with David. Inquire of the Lord, do what he says, great results. House of Obed-Edom is being blessed. Okay, God, I'm getting the picture. And then we see in 15 the same account, and we see this insight. David calls the Levites to carry the ark and says to them, it is because you did not bring up the ark of the Lord. We did not inquire of him how to do it in the prescribed way. We did not go looking for the revelation to find out how we should do it and respond to that. While our response is obviously a significant part of our relationship, response-focused worship, self-focused worship will not hold up. But our response matters. So in the second part of this session, we will look at these 7 Hebrew words of praise that can not only fill our services, but our lives. Because worship is life.